Welcome, folks. So glad you could join us in downtown Sylva, North Carolina at City Lights. We are pleased to welcome Jean Hargadon Wehner with her new book, Walking with Aletheia. Am I pronouncing that right?
I say Aletheia.
Aletheia, sorry. Walking with Aletheia. Should have checked that with you. A memoir of some tough times and overcoming tough times and confronting trauma, which we all hope will help other folks. Jean is also helps folks not only through her writing, but she's a certified life coach, Reiki practitioner, and reflexologist. So lots of ways of fixing what ails you, or helping you along that path. Jean, thank you so much for coming today. Tell us about your book.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you for having us here. Very
Pleasure.
appreciative. Well, I mainly would like to first start with saying thank you, Chris and Steve, for the publishing of this book. It's meant an awful lot to me, and I think a lot of people are glad that you did too. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Certainly our honor.
Thank you. I think Ed wants to say a couple things first.
Just a couple things. For those, Jean, as Chris indicated, is the author of Walking with Aletheia, which is her second book. Her first book, Conversations with Myself, was a book of poetry. And Walking with Aletheia has been a work in progress for about 3.5 years, going on 4 years. I am Jean's younger brother. I'm a year younger, and also I edited the book along with her, and she wrote the book, I edited it. And again, I also was working with Chris and Steve and Logo Sophia the whole time too, particularly in the last year and a half. I would like to ask Jean a few questions just to maybe get a feel for the book. I know that it is a book, as Chris had indicated, on the healing journey, and but there's a lot that goes into that. So I thought maybe we could have a conversation about, like, you know, what that's like and what are the different aspects of how one goes through that spiritual and psychological journey. So I guess the first question is a very general book. Like, what, in your own words, is the book about?
Well, it ultimately is about my life, but not a biography. I feel that there is information about my growing up and my experiences that are important for you to understand the healing process on a psychological and spiritual way within my life with those things going on. So it is hopefully a way for me to share my personal health walk. And in doing that, I am hopefully encouraging other survivors of any kind of trauma to just think that maybe there's a way out, maybe there's a way to deal with, maybe there are things they can do, maybe they're not alone. And so that was kind of to hopefully inspire and in some way support, you know, those who support survivors of all kinds of trauma, as well as those survivors as well.
And is there anything in addition to helping survivors, which obviously is the most important thing, but was there anything else as far as reasons as to why you wrote the book? What inspired you to write it?
Well, I think that one of the things I felt very, very strongly is I am a survivor, and I continue to remember. So when you begin remembering trauma of any sort that went on, it's not like all of a sudden it's all there. So it's a process, and I come across in control. I come across very articulate. I come across as if I have it together. And I really wanted other survivors, especially, to know that, identify, you know, it's not, this is what you have, this is me, this is me surviving. And so most of us know that we don't want to show the vulnerable side. We don't want to be that open to the possibility of being hurt or misused or abused again. So it was important that I identify. Another reason is I began with a new language that that had to do with an awakening of a sacred feminine. I never had that until this breakthrough, the shattering of how this blended with my faith, how it was so much a part of my faith system. And in that respect, I felt like I could start putting some of that to words. And so I decided this was the best way to do that, and to, in some way, maybe encourage others to put into words the things that they are finding as they journey, you know. And most importantly, it was another step for my own personal healing. I don't do these things, and I've learned this the hard way, to fix anyone or to give more than what I have to give. I have to find where it works for my own growth, more integration, more healing within myself. And then it's kind of like love yourself, and then you can love others. So it's really for me in that respect, but at the same time it has a ripple effect, which I hope is for others.
So you've talked about that you wanted to reach survivors and help survivors. Is there anyone else that you're trying to reach with the book?
Yeah, I'm very aware that from my own personal experience that a survivor of any kind of trauma, losing a child, you experience that on your own body, in your mind, and your spirit. Losing a husband, being sexually abused as a child, it's kind of, you gravitate to those people you can talk to. And when you do that, you're not aware of how much you're putting on those people. So I wanted to write this book as a tool to help those loved ones or friends or those that are the ear for survivors. I feel like therapists have been instrumental in my life in a way that I would never have wanted to give credit to anything other than me. I want it to be the answer. And here I am wanting therapists to know that this might support something that they want to help their patients with, or encourage them to know that they're not alone in trying maybe some of these tools, because somebody else has written about how it's helped them.
Well, following up on that, have you, the book's been out for several months now. Have you gotten any indication that in fact you are reaching some of the people that you were trying to reach?
I've gotten, for as little as I'm on Facebook, and you know, to I have one therapist who has contacted me to let me know that she's been contacted by therapists who are saying that in sharing the book or segments of the book, their patients are moving outside of a stuck place, and they're very excited about that. I also know another therapist who put her review up on a 2000 list of therapists. It's an international membership. And so that to me was saying she felt strongly about. I have at least 5 or 6 trauma specialists or psychologists who have written reviews, and what they are saying affirms me, but it helps other people know that this is what happens when people experience This is what happens when people experience severe trauma. What I talk about in here, what I say, what I experienced, it's real. But it's real for me, for Jean. And you might have something else that you've experienced as you've dealt with whatever it is you're dealing with. And those experts are saying it's real. Talk about it. Say it out loud. Tell that therapist, tell that person who is your confidant, however you need to do it, because it's real. You're not crazy. We all just do it differently. And a lot of times it really makes a difference to have the help. And that's where therapy, I have felt periodically, has been a tool.
Speaking of helping, you have had some severe trauma in your life. But I'm wondering, like, who is it and what is it that you would say helped you through working with the trauma once you began to experience it, and to resolve that through your healing process?
Well, I'm also 4-year certified spiritual director, and I was that before, in the Catholic Church, before I began remembering the priest abusing me. Now, before that, I was working with therapists already because I had remembered 10 years before my uncle abusing me. And I was also immersed in my Catholic faith, so I had a spiritual director. I was extremely involved within church. So I'd say that those that have helped me, some were already on. I had, when I say therapy, I'm talking what works for you. Acupuncture, massage therapist. I had Reiki practitioners. I had talk therapy. I had friends, family, however you want to look at it, people who I could let in there. I had the tools. Journaling was an extremely powerful tool that I used and had been very, very, very helpful in my whole process of healing. Meditation and going into my quiet, or a combination of all those things. I also feel that I was helped by what spirit guides, and the spirit guides I may mean Gray Owl, or Jesus, or Kathy Sesnick, or a snake, and these guides spontaneously showed up, and I let it happen in the journey of that psychological and spiritual movement. And they were always as if they knew me, they were present, and they were there to help and support and protect me. And so that then goes to personas. I have these little aspects of yourself. It's kind of like we all have different hats we put on, but when we have a severe trauma, whatever, and especially something of this amount for a child, it's like fractions. You fracture off, and the personas are aspects of myself that literally would hold different painful experiences. And so the journey was finding those parts and working with what they held and realizing they're me, and then integrating with that fractured part. But I can honestly say that I thank them. I thank those guides. They have been the holders, the guides through treacherous terrain.
And I guess if there's one or two things that you wanted a reader to take from your book, what might that be?
I want readers to know that we are not responsible for what other people do to us or what we do when we are forced to survive situations. that's something I continue to work on, and I think it's important that people hear that. I think that, I think it's important to know you're not alone. No matter what it is that hit you, alongside the head, and all of a sudden there you are. There are other people who have lost children. There are other people who have lost a spouse. There are other people who have unfortunately been sexually abused. There are other people who have been raped. There are other people who have experienced being beaten on by a spouse. There are other people who lost a job and all of a sudden, or lost a limb because of an operation of some disease that had taken that part of who they were. So I think it's important that people know they're not alone, no matter what kind of trauma that they've experienced.
Okay. And I know that we will, in a few minutes, get to questions from anyone here, but I think you said that you would like to read a chapter, and maybe to give like a little snippet of like maybe what the book's about and how it sounds. So does that sound okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Is everybody okay with?
Yeah, that's great.
Sure.
With that idea?
Yeah.
Okay. I will just kind of give a little bit of a front one. This one that I was going to read is called Lantern in the Bow. So the book is made up of chapters, and there are some that are vignettes and some that are a chapter. The vignettes are, I literally have a bunch of journals, and I never read them back over. I've done them over the years. They work while I'm doing them. They're a tool in themselves. But when we started to write, instead of going to a library to research things that I was going to be writing, I went to my little library. And so a lot of times the vignettes are actually taken right out of my journals, and in the moment experience that had gone on that many years ago. And I feel like I've written this is a master journal. You know, I've taken, again, with that idea of integration, bringing things to whole, bringing them back. These are all those journals and all those experiences brought into one place. And the funny thing is, it's like I used to, with dissociating, you have boxes. It's like those little aspects. And you have, this is over here, and this is over here, and this is over here. And you don't have that conscious thought, but that's what it is. And now I feel like they're all in chapters. So it's kind of like, I don't have that bunch of, it's all there. Now I have order to where I've had things put to be able to not be overwhelmed by them. So I could keep doing my norm, whatever that may be. So I thought that was really kind of neat to experience that. Lantern in the Bow is, it is a vignette, and I'm just going to say it's kind of one of the things with meditation or with that idea of going into my quiet. There would be a depth, and people will understand. It's like, and all of a sudden, there's just a movement. There's just this. I let go to what is happening, and I learned over the years to discern it. And I also learned over the years to have companions. And a lot of times that was either a particular kind of therapist. It might even have been a dear friend who was on the same kind of wavelength with me, that I could talk about, what had gone on. But I usually worked it through, and I could usually judge if it was worthwhile to continue moving with it by the fruits of it. So what you may read in here, if you see vignette, it was worth the fruits of it. Chapter 14, Lantern in the Bow. From 1992 through 1996, I was bombarded with repressed memories of sexual abuse previously suffered at Keogh, causing me to feel vulnerable and isolated. My family was losing our faith and trust in the church, and there was no life preserver to be found. After experiencing so many powerful prayer encounters with Jesus' guidance in earlier years, I now felt extremely alone. I could not tolerate the thought that Jesus, the heart friend I came to know, did nothing to stop the sexual abuse I suffered in high school. I also began to question my need for the spiritual guide to be male. Was this just because I was taught from a young age, through words and actions, that males were more powerful than females? I became so confused and angry at Jesus that I wanted nothing more to do with him. This was a very dark and empty time for me. I refer to this period of my journey from around 1996 to 2000 as the Artemis years. I was rudderless and needed something to fill the massive void in my heart when I stopped relating with Jesus as the Son of God, a spiritual companion, and a friend. I certainly had outside professional, spiritual, and familiar supports to keep me moving. They helped me through the next level of healing and integration, with me feeling abandoned by the church and divorced from my concept of God, much less Jesus. I was beginning to have faith only in myself. So I decided to start relating with a female spirit guide. For a few years, I tried to replace Jesus with the Greek goddess Artemis, who I believed was the equivalent of Jesus in many ways. Artemis is the daughter of Zeus, king of the gods. She was regarded as patron of girls, young women, and the protectress of women during childbirth. Artemis is also the goddess of hunting, so I knew she would be strong enough to protect me. I thought if I could replace Jesus with Artemis, I could continue my deep spiritual relationship with this guide. I spent several years attempting to imagine and sense this female warrior, as well as the inspiring and wise spirit guide she could be. Amid this struggle to create an authentic relationship with Artemis, I continued to make time for prayer and meditation. Once, while in my quiet, I found myself at the entrance to a dark tunnel with a lantern inviting me to follow. I cautiously began to move forward. The lantern would appear, floating up to my left, but I had a sense someone was holding it. I struggled to see Artemis carrying the lantern to guide my way, but I could not see anyone. I questioned if this was Artemis or Jesus, then realized it didn't matter. What mattered was the light, which was illuminating just enough space around me to see where I was stepping. I slowly followed the lantern for a few weeks in real time, realizing as I progressed that the tunnel was my bow. I was being led by the lantern through the depth of shit in order to find more of myself. I would encounter different things as I moved along, and then I would sit in that place for any number of days, reflecting on what I came across. One time, as I rounded the bend of the bow, I saw myself as a young child stuck up to her waist in feces, and she could not move. I was confused. I sat and contemplated, what is this about? And especially, how do I get her out? I was stuck in the experience of the abuse. This muck was paralyzing parts of myself and was suffocating me. Through this process, I was becoming aware of how deeply the child within me was affected by the abuse. I knew the healing that unfolded from my prayer experiences was multi-layered and could happen instantly, or it could take months, maybe years. As this ongoing meditation progressed, I began to share this inner quest with my support network. I realized I was dealing with the self-blame, fear, and separation that the wounded child within me was still immersed in. As I worked in my therapies on this new awareness, as well as others discovered along the way, the girl eventually became free of the muck. I see now that this psychological and sacred journey through my subconscious which showed up in my quiet as my bow, was like a mirror reflecting the severed child to my adult self. In the same way photos triggered memories, this process was showing me what was going on within one part of myself that I was not yet connected to. Pausing, sitting, and contemplating each finding was allowing the truth within me to surface into my consciousness. At some point as I continued on my inner journey, I came around another bend within my bow and heard the most terrifying sound. It stopped me in my tracks. I thought it was a monster. I still had the lantern illuminating enough space for me to move. Consumed with fear, I sat down. Days went by, and I would not go any further because I thought this would be the end. I could feel the child fearing a monster around the corner, someone or something that was going to hurt me in some way. The monster was waiting to devour me. I finally got up the courage and cautiously went around the bend. There before me was a cross. Hanging on the cross was an old woman. She was crying out with pain. Her moans were the sounds of raw suffering. I sat at her feet and sobbed. As I reflected on this breakthrough, I began to understand who this woman was and what her pain represented. I felt on a spiritual plane that there had been an intense battle which occurred at Keogh, my high school, between good and evil. As I remembered more horrific acts perpetrated against me, I experienced a deep despair, which accompanied an intuitive sense that my little spirit was always running 5 steps ahead of Joseph Maskell, staying just out of his grasp. I believe that with the death of Sister Kathy Sesnick, he caught me. The clergy abusers' evil actions broke me down and were an attempt to destroy my connection to that deep feminine spirit within all of us, with all the wisdom, grace, and power that entails. And they succeeded in making me feel that my soul was dead and that any wisdom I should seek was external to me. The atrocities that happened to me blocked my connection to my very self, separating me from my soul and causing me to suffer. I knew in my heart that the woman hanging on a cross in the depths of my bow was wisdom, is wisdom. She came to me in the form of an ancient grandmother who had not only shared in my suffering, but was now awakening me to the truth that I am wise. I can be empowered without hurting others. I can trust my intuition, and I am lovable and loving. I continue to get stronger in my belief of these truths. I've been able to put a stepladder against the cross, climb up, and carefully bring that weak and withered body down to the ground, relieving our pain and slowly connecting with the wisdom she shares. I am working on bringing this woman to full health and integration. After much time and having other experiences within the vow, I reached the end of this inner path. When I came around the last corner, I stood before an ancient stone cell with bars and a secure lock. As I got closer, I saw something in the cell. I could not tell if it was a person or an animal. I was drawn closer and closer. This thing was chained to the wall. That heavy chain was connected to an iron collar around the neck of this child animal. It was bent over with its ears appearing to have grown shut. I saw no movement of its eyes, which also looked as if they had grown shut or were purposely plastered shut. This tiny, scaly thing was hunched in the corner of the cell with a brilliant red ruby plugging up its mouth. It pained me to look at this creature. I sat with this experience of the vows for a long time, but I was hesitant to return to that child animal in the cell. Reflecting on that place made me afraid and confused. I did not want to have any part of this discovery, even though I was now aware that the creature was a child. I suspected this was the precious little girl running from Maskell, and that while a part of me had been caught, this part was hidden away. When I found the courage to reflect and move closer to the cell, I saw how still the child was. Like a chameleon, she could have been mistaken for one of those ancient stones that formed her cell. Outside the cage stood a guard who was also very still and focused. At some point, I approached the guard and said I wanted the key. He told me no. I told him, that child is a part of me, and I'm telling you I want the key. The guard said she gave me the key and said I was not to give it to anyone. I was stunned by this response. To be sure nobody got in or out of the cell, the girl gave the key to the guard. I could not imagine why she chose to stay locked in a cell, but I knew this new clue meant we were making progress. I believed if I could figure out what that ruby was, I would learn why she was there. Meanwhile, I realized my efforts to make Artemis my spiritual guide were not working. My previous experiences had taught me I could not create a spirit guide. The guide needed to present himself or herself to me. These guides show up unexpectedly with their own purpose to protect and guide me. I am often surprised by what they say or do, causing me to realize their message was far from my own conscious thought. I don't understand where the guides come from, but I know when their presence is authentic and I can trust them. I had to admit to myself that the spirit I was drawn to for guidance and counsel was not Artemis. It was Jesus, and Jesus was male. My dilemma was I once thought I knew who Jesus was, and now I was confused about him. Even as I worked tirelessly to separate us, I realized that Jesus was available whenever I acknowledged him. Still, for all I knew, he could have been a figment of my imagination, another persona within me, the Son of God, or the actual spirit of a man who died. Whoever he was, I felt fooled and deceived by him, or was it my own self? I now was reluctant to blindly follow Jesus as I once did, since I did not trust that he would have my best interest at heart. So I presented Jesus with a spiritual contract, which I wrote out. He could stay as my spiritual guide named Jesus, and I would not care that he was male, but I could not unconditionally place my trust in him. I was going to discern and dissect everything, especially as it pertained to him. He agreed.
Wow. Beautiful. So beautiful, Jean. Beautiful.
So I just, actually you answered in a certain sense the question I was going to ask, which had to do with, well, there's one thing. So there's one thing to deal with the actual abuse itself, but then you've got the institutional overlay that supports it, right? And with you as the church, the city of Baltimore, the police department, et cetera, everywhere you turned.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and and other accounts of people that I've read
Right.
have shown this to be the case, especially with, stuff that the CIA does and things like that. And it seems like there's always this attempt to put the abused at this point where they feel like there's no way out.
Right.
And that they have to submit willingly almost to what is going on. And that seems to be part of the whole thing. So it seems like that in every case that I've read where people have overcome it, something has sort of come from the outside. And at this point, this is a light that maybe this is the light that you had to follow.
Mm-hmm.
So I think your chapter answered the question, so I don't want to force you to say anything else. if you don't want to, but I was just kind of, that was what I was picking up on, and that seems like it's worse than the dark night of the soul, it's the dark night of eternity, at that point, right?
Right.
So, anyway, does that kind of resonate where there's like almost something has to come from the outside, some sort of.
Yes,
Like a
and
deus
the
ex
interesting
machina.
thing is
Yeah.
I wanted it to come from the outside in the form of justice, or in the form of the church, doing the right thing, or the courts taking this further so that man was held accountable. I wanted it to be what we've been taught, external, still, outside of me, but that it was tangible, it's what we knew. And so, because I say yes to that. It seemed like, even the interesting thing is that I didn't want Artemis to be my spirit guide, because I couldn't relate, I couldn't feel it. And yet she guided me somehow to come to the understanding that Jesus was who it was. We were talking about that coming. It's like, all of it comes from outside. Even when you think of the idea of the light comes from outside. And yet it also comes from inside. So in some respects, it is more trusting than those things that I thought were going to take care of everything. We'll fix it. And then we have to think, if it comes out from outside to help me, whatever we want to call that, I have to believe it can also help those institutions. Or, it's like that light doesn't just shine for me, or that guidance doesn't just happen for me. Part of this is an understanding that it's, we make choices. And I chose to follow that light. And I just think that you're right, it's like.
Right, it's like a real crossroad moment, I think.
Right, 100%.
So Jean, do you think it's noteworthy that the light showed up in the darkest of places?
Right.
And you could almost imagine that it's always been there.
Well, that's it.
But you had no access to it until you took the action to inquire and to do the deep work and allow the memories to come forward.
Yeah, it's almost like the light helped bring them forward. Like when I think about the meditation of the Great Mother, at the mountain, that's light. And I didn't realize, and I think this is really par for the course, I didn't realize how dark it was until there was that lantern,
Yeah, that's interesting.
So it's like, I was more even then focused on who's carrying it. And the truth was, it had nothing to do with who was carrying it. It had to do with that amount of insight, intuitive sense, conscious, being aware of what's around me. And the light allowed that to be kind of shown, So even that, you have to take your focus and let the light focus you in some way, because, and that became the dark path that I would have preferred just not to have even gone anywhere near.
Sure.
And there's something about these inner journeys that I guess it's part of what I'm trying to help people understand. It's best to have companionship. It's best to have people who can help you through, but going through those dark places, it's not for the weak of heart. It really, that's why the tools, that's why the people, that's why the building, you have to build the trust, because we had our trust shattered. So you're also dealing with people who don't trust easily. So even that, it almost was easier to trust that light than to trust a therapist who might say, okay, let's do active imaging, I could I could discern what that light was showing. I had the control over what I did with it. But I needed those people that I could talk about it later with.
It seems crucial to find someone,
Yeah.
even if it's just a good friend or a
Right.
relative who will listen
Right.
and to validate, because it seems from what I've been learning from reading we have another author who has come forward, that the mantra coming from the perpetrators is always that don't even try to escape.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible. We have total control. You will never escape. But they're lying.
Right.
That's
And-
not true.
Right. And that's part of what you don't get.
How could you
Because
know?
in the moment of the threat, that's all you know. And I think that is, I was thinking about it last night when we were talking, and it was like, when you think about spousal abuse,
Mm-hmm.
people are secreted out and hidden so that that abuser can't find them.
Yes.
Because,
Safe houses, you mean?
pardon?
Do you mean like a safe house?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
You don't do that with children.
Hmm.
You have to be really clear about what it is you're saying and how you're going to say it, and that you've got your people in place that understand what you're picking up, and maybe they're picking it up too. You know, that's another part of it. It's like, is this crime?
This is-
And it's a brainwashing. So even what you said, you have a tape being created, and that tape starts to become the truth. Because there's nobody else knows what's going on, so that's the only thing you're hearing.
It's the only message you're
It's
getting.
the only message
And it's
you're getting.
repeated.
Yes,
And we all
Yes.
know about repetition.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I do think that that's why it's important, if you can, to find that person, any one that you feel that you're drawn to. When Matthew passed away, when our little baby died, I was surprised how much I needed to talk.
Mhm.
And my mother would sit at the dining room table, and I would talk and talk. I can't tell you how many times I said it over and over and over. And then there was a friend one day that just said, if you ever want to talk, I'm around on Tuesdays. And every Tuesday then I was over there, and I would talk and talk and talk. And I would say it again and say it again, because it is like, again, a tape. What happens is that when there is a sudden death or there is that trauma, it's as if somebody cut into what you think is the normal thing that's going on constantly on those tapes that we have. And now you gotta create a new tape. But first you gotta straighten out, what is it that just screwed things up? And you can't even call it that, because it's something you wanted, it's something you loved, it's something that's, so it needs to be talked about. And I do agree with you. I think that if it can be a good friend, I don't think it has to be family. When you watch The Keepers, when you read my book, when you see my brother sitting here, you think, oh, you had even said, what a wonderful family.
Mhm.
It is a wonderful family. But all of those siblings out of 10 were not all up close and personal. I couldn't allow it. They were spiritual and moral supports,
Mhm.
but they weren't necessarily involved in the information that was coming up and moving through me. I couldn't allow it. It was too, so I do think that I have said to groups, you don't need it to be your family. Family is much different than we have in mind, it can be somebody who has been there, and you meet at a function like this, and you go out for tea, and before you know it, you can talk, because maybe they're 5 months, maybe they're 5 years ahead of the work, and they can hear it. And then you might go out with somebody and they can't hear it, because you're triggering each other constantly. You're banging off of each other's trauma. So it is a exploration, and it's trusting your gut. It's and that's hard for us, because we've had to be out of our bodies, You know, we've had to move outside of ourselves. So to hear it though, and to know that there are ways to start slowly doing things, or to trust if the therapist is saying, how about we try some journaling?
Mhm.
You know, maybe try, nobody's locking anybody into anything. You give it a try. Maybe you'll find it's one of the things that allows you to.
Well, journaling and writing seems to be key. I know that Kathy O'Brien talked about that when she said her partner Mark suggested that she do that, because it has a way of unlocking, and there's more of a free flow of memory,
Yeah.
and it's not as threatening. And I'm wondering, another thing, are you encouraged by the news of all these stories coming out in the open now, whereas maybe 40 years ago this book would be maybe an underground cult classic for people, you know, but it's sub rosa, it's not broken the surface. I see now that these topics are talked about more freely and more openly. Do you find that encouraging? Does it make you feel somehow better that more people are finding their voice and being able to speak out?
Yeah.
Are you noticing those trends?
I think that as long as we don't hold perpetrators accountable, as long as we continue to have systems be in charge of the final outcome,
Excellent, excellent
I think
answer.
that we can all talk all we want,
Excellent.
and then we all go back to sleep. Because the institutions or those systems need to self-care themselves. They need to open their doors and their parts in all of this. And as long as they can't, they're still doing it. They will always still be doing it. So we can be really pleased that this is what's happening, but it's like anything else, it can also calm down.
Do you see it as perhaps a first step toward public awareness that will then cause some kind of a rise in insistence that something be done? Can you see it as a necessary first step?
100%, and I also feel that it's twofold, because I see that I've been a part of really speaking and doing, and they did nothing.
Yes.
They did worse than
yes,
nothing.
and that's
Okay.
part of that.
Yes.
You can't. You're helpless.
Yes, and
Right.
right now, the Attorney General's investigation that's going on in Maryland,
Mm-hmm.
it has been almost 4 years, and we know nothing. You know, I've written a book in that time, and so since The Keepers came out, a year later that investigation started. A lot of the people who came forward because of The Keepers went to the investigator down at we sent them down to the state's attorneys, you know, to go tell them what you are. And so now we come up on an election year. We're at a time when two of the people are moving, and they've been a part of this team. And as a survivor, it is the silence is deafening.
Mm-hmm.
It is reminiscent of, I don't have any power in this. We have brought our vulnerability, we have brought our brokenness, we have put our wound on the table again. I've done it for the courts, I did it with the archdiocese, I have done it for the mediation, and here it is again. And to have it almost 4 years. So I don't know how much we can push and make change. I think something has to, I've come to have to see it that the change is happening survivor to survivor,
Mm-hmm.
that the survivors are supporting survivors. And that's why we have to support those people who are supporting the survivors, because it is a grassroots movement. We brought about those systems, and then we elect people into those systems. And then we look to them to tell us, are we right or wrong in what we think should be happening? So we just need to get our own selves grounded again and be that grassroots that creates the change within ourselves, and almost ignore and not put that even though that's ridiculous. I know that we need that, and I know that,
I understand.
but in order for me to be not consumed by what they are not doing, or what they could have done, or how they could treat this differently. Most of the things that I have done have had legal systems sitting in front of them.
Tells you a lot.
It really, a lot of survivors won't say anything because they're afraid they're going to get sued. You know, because if a perpetrator's still alive, it's slander. Most, it was in a room and nobody else was there. So it's he said, she said. We're talking about a crime that is really geared for perpetrators.
Yes.
And so you have people who are afraid to say something because they're afraid of what the retaliation will be. It is, we are guilty until we can prove we're innocent. And if you look at everything that we've all done, no one has spoken up to support us. We are still moving forward, and so that's where I say it's twofold. The beauty of the movement, the feeling of that energy is empowering, but to what end? Because you still need those systems to be accountable and to make change. You need the statute of limitations in Maryland to drop. And instead what they do is they increase a few years and they put a window so that nobody can ever, look back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're the walking wounded. And statistically speaking, it's usually late 40s into the 50s before anybody even talks about
That's right.
being abused. Well, in Maryland, I find it interesting that they stopped it at 38. And those statistics are being known by everyone, politicians too. So if they know that people aren't speaking up until later, they're already set it up for the perps. It's a system for the perpetrators.
Indeed, it is. I cannot disagree.
Well, Ed,
I
what would you
agree.
like to say about that?
Ed, yeah, from your,
It is, in my view, unrealistic to think that somebody who has had the kind of trauma, at least that I've witnessed with Jean, probably is ever going to be in a position where they would be coming forward. I think that, and I don't mean to sound as if this was something magical, but I do think it was. But I do think that there was a confluence of things coming together in her life that allowed her to actually be able to step forward. She had amazing therapists.
sounds that way from the book.
Ironically, some from within the Catholic faith, who she learned so much from, learned so many tools from, and again, I find it ironic that she just sort of turned those tools around and actually used them against the institutions who taught them her tools.
That's Aikido.
That certainly is.
We need to all take lessons in Aikido. I'm serious too.
Yeah, and but I think I'm only saying to say I think that's the exception, given the amount of training that she had before she even began to remember. Most people don't have that, and I think therefore most people stay quiet, and they stay quiet probably until they go to their grave. Or they certainly stay quiet until the perpetrator dies, or they stay quiet until their parents die. There is something that is always keeping them from actually disclosing until certain things have happened. And usually those things that have to happen later in life. So it does, to me, it does call out for just an abolition of the statute of limitations. I understand, I was a judge, and I understand the idea that, we do need to make sure that if someone is accused of that person then has the opportunity to be able to defend themselves. And I think that's, in my view, that's really what an evidentiary proceeding is about. I mean, it's about, whether it's corroboration of what a person is saying, whether or not it's an admission by a perpetrator who may be on his or her own deathbed, and they're saying that I don't want to go to hell, so I'm going to go ahead and confess this. So in their view, I don't spend eternity in damnation. So that's, all of those circumstances, I think, lead to the idea that it's unrealistic to think that there should be this limit. However, in Maryland, it's even, in as far as the civil end, I mean, and in the case that Jean had, it's even worse because there it was a rejection of the repressed memories as being a valid reason to extend the statute of limitations. So a number of states have said, well, we understand that repressed memories are real. I mean, people do, just as she did, compartmentalize. You compartmentalize things, you don't remember things, and you don't because your body, whether you call it your body or your mind, but your well-being is saying, you can't remember this because, to be frank, you'll kill yourself.
That's
So you repress it. And when you do remember it, at least if you're going to have a statute of limitations, say the issue of whether or not you have remembered, and the entire time or just recently, in my view, and this I hope I'm not getting too much into the weeds here, as a court system, you would say give it to the jury. Let the jury decide
that's
whether
a
or
good-
not this
yeah.
That was
person.
a choice they had back then.
And
Chairman
let
had
the
that
jury
choice.
decide whether or not this is in fact a valid reason for somebody to have missed the normal statute of limitations. And her particular case in the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in Maryland, said that that's not a valid reason to extend the statute of limitations. Or to begin it at the point in time when a jury could decide, well, we think that she or he began to remember on this date, and then if you're going to have a statute of limitations, okay, now you have three years from that date.
And that's why I agreed to do it, because I was in that 3-year statute of limitations. And the truth of the matter is when you start to remember after you have boxed it and severed it and put it away, each time I lived it for the first time.
That's what I was imagining.
I was in that experience as if it were happening for the first time. So when I was asked about, did I want to participate, 2 things came to mind. This was against Joseph Maskell, the Archdiocese of Baltimore, School Sisters of Notre Dame. I didn't want to be in this at all. I was terrified. I thought I was crazy anyway. I was in my own little hell. I was a victim. There was no advocates. Don't ever go into any of those meetings without an advocate with you. No matter what anyone says. And if they got to be quiet, fine. Do whatever you got to do, but don't go in without an advocate. If you are a victim, if you are a survivor, you need to have somebody who can walk out of there with you and know what was said, because we space out. We go in and we can leave, and I will say to him, tell me what I said.
Yeah,
Did it sound okay? Was it okay? Because it's that the triggering is the fear, is that surge, and it's so familiar. And so you're going in to do something good or something and it triggers that feeling like, I just can't be present in it because it's an old feeling. But one of the things that happened is when they said to me, do you want to be a part of this lawsuit? 2 things were going on. One was I believed, because of my in-body cellular experience of experiencing it for the first time, I was in that 3-year statute of limitation period. From when I started to remember, to me that is when I really started
That's when it
experiencing
happened for you.
And I was in that 3 years. The other thing is they were letting him out into a parish, and it wasn't all that far away from where we lived. And the kid in me was terrified. I was terrified. I had now done 21 hours of deposition. I had gone into a courtroom. I had said all these things. And even though they kept all those records in there. Oh, no, that was before. That was before. He had been taken away for counseling, or they were going to see it, he was taken out of a parish. They were putting him back in a parish. And I was afraid he was going to come in my back window and shoot me. And it wasn't realistic, but to me it was realistic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it could have been.
Jim's like, maybe. Yeah. So you were having to confront him. You were having to be in the same room with him in
Every
these
time
depositions.
I thought I was going to have to be. But any time that I went to the archdiocesan meetings, he was not there. I anticipated he could be, but he was not. When I gave a formal statement, they took him out of the parish that he was active in, and they put him in a place he probably golf, I don't know. But he was supposed to be tested or checked. They came up with nothing. And so then I was asked if I would, and that was after Teresa had come forward with those, we had sent out letters and it was put in a newspaper anonymously. And she came forward. I had no idea what she came forward saying. All I was told is that there was somebody else. She was Jane Roe, I was Jane Doe.
Right. Okay.
And the interesting thing is that I didn't know until after. I met her in 2016. I had never met her. She was in a different year than me. I had no idea. I couldn't listen to what anybody was saying because they had me believing that maybe someone had said something and that's why I was thinking this. Or maybe the therapist had said something and where it gave me the idea. And so I was always afraid, as my own worst detective, that I was creating these stories. And so, but it wasn't I said yes, because I couldn't take that, him being back out after I had said, I remember this man.
Mm-hmm.
And I was afraid for other kids.
Sure.
In all those different parts and pieces of myself. It's like there were kids out there in those parishes. And especially when somebody got a clean slate, bill of slate or whatever they call it.
Mm-hmm.
Slate bill.
Oh, hell.
Okay, yeah. I got clean slate
Something.
bill of health, It was, to me, he was being given prime meat, because now parents would know that anything that had gone on, they said he was innocent. And that put him in even a more powerful position.
Absolutely.
And so I do think that all of that, it's like, but the main thing is that it just, the statute of limitations has to be totally, it has to be gone. It is a law for the perpetrators. It is a law for the perpetrators.
That's well put.